In March 2024, the District Court of Oslo, Norway, deregistered Jehovah's Witnesses as a tax-exempt organization and denied them further government subsidies due to their track record of shunning former members, specifically members who were baptized as minors. As of March 2025, the Jehovah's Witnesses appealed this ruling and won. Some say this is a huge blow to human rights. Others say this is a win for religious freedom. Wherever you fall on this ruling, here are 3 key factors to consider. Jehovah's Witness baptism. First, it's important to understand what it means to be baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. Depending on the church, baptism can signify different things. This means you're born again. This means you're cleansed. But in the Jehovah's Witnesses, when a minor applies for baptism, it's not a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing. They're required to answer a series of questions from the congregation elders regarding organizational doctrine and policies. Then, once they eventually get baptized at their annual convention or assembly, it's supposed to mean that they are consenting to and fully responsible for any repercussions that come with breaking the rules. Jehovah's Witnesses love to use the example of joining a club. So, let's say an adult wants to join a country club. They typically know someone, ingratiate themselves somehow with someone who has connections. They pay their monthly dues. There's rules they have to follow. They can't just join the club. But once they're in, there's various benefits and amenities for members. A clean golf course, hot towels, the grounds are kept pristine. Now, if this adult decides to leave the country club, sure, they might lose some social benefits. They might not see certain people anymore. But it is highly unlikely that John Smith from Racquetball is going to shun you if you happen to bump into each other at Costco 3 weeks later. It's really unlikely that a good friend that you made at the country club is going to stop being your friend just because you don't attend the country club anymore. Just because you're no longer a card-carrying member. You can still meet for a drink, hang out somewhere else. It is highly unlikely that leaving the country club is going to have serious, long-term impact on your physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. We're not talking about human rights violations. It just means you drink your brandy at home. Now, let's say a minor tries to join the country club. Of course, they would need their parent or guardian to sign for them, but the two are not mutually exclusive, sort of a full package deal. It is highly unlikely that if a child decides they don't want to hang out with mom and dad anymore at the country club, that mom and dad are going to shun them, kick them out of the house, or hold a grudge against them indefinitely. So while it's true that a Jehovah's Witness parent could say, well, you have my consent, I'd love for you to join the organization and be just like me. The country club, conversely, does not absolve parents of their parental responsibilities or heavily suggest they cut ties with their own child. It is highly unlikely that we are talking about a country club with a secret handbook that says, well, if a child refuses to wear Simply Southern and pledge allegiance to the club president, a committee will be formed to determine his guilt and whether he is a dangerous influence to the rest of the club. And may it also be noted that any parent caught fraternizing with their non-member son or daughter implicates themselves and risks further investigation. The country club is an insulting analogy, since the consequences for breaching protocol are far less severe and don't place a child's safety at risk. When a Jehovah's Witness minor gets baptized, the same rules that apply to adults also apply to them. So if they get expelled for breaking a rule, or they decide they want to leave later after their brain has fully developed into an adult brain, a brain that can fully comprehend the collateral the organization has baked into its baptism requirements, they're now beholden to an exploitative contract that has blurred the lines of consent. When a minor gets baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not a baptism, it's a traptism. The adults who were supposed to protect them didn't. Not only did they not protect them from entering into this ill-advised contract, but if the organization is in breach of said contract, i.e. they don't hold up their end of the agreement as religious leaders, there's zero accountability. No person, regardless of age, would consent to commit themselves to an organization that lacks transparency, specifically withholding information that could harm them. Case in point, baptismal candidates may be schooled on Watchtower ideology, but are not informed that sexual predators in the congregation have more rights than their victims. The organization essentially takes the signed contract and staples a batch of hidden addendums to the back of it. Not only are minors unable to consent to a binding, lifelong contract, even if they wanted to, Jehovah's Witness minors are heavily influenced by social pressure from their parents and the congregation to get baptized. And that's why it's crucial to consider not only the requirements and technical minutiae for baptism, but to understand the culture of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Jehovah's Witness culture. Minors who are raised in the organization are routinely badgered through Watchtower literature, sermons, and social pressure to get baptized. Religious concepts like Armageddon or Judgment Day are used as fear tactics, and children are told that if they don't get baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll die for being disobedient. And if that isn't enough to motivate them, interpersonal conflicts such as punishment from parents and ostracism from their peers lead them to do something they normally wouldn't do. Jehovah's Witness minors who push back against baptism are withheld love and affection, friendship with other Jehovah's Witnesses, and in extreme cases, are kicked out of the house and have their material resources cut off. Through a clever game of semantics and legal loopholes, the organization has historically skirted accountability by stating one thing in print, but behaving very differently within the confines of the Kingdom Hall. This means that they can state a bold-faced lie in court. We don't have a shunning policy. There is technically no official policy that states if a Jehovah's Witness is expelled or resigns, the entire congregation and their family is forbidden to speak to that person. But it isn't until one lives as a Jehovah's Witness, is fully immersed in its culture, that the reality is very different than the PR front they craft for the public. Take, for instance, the Shepherd the Flock of God Handbook, a manual for Jehovah's Witness elders. This book was written exclusively for elders. Copies are not made available for the rest of the congregation. This exclusivity illustrates a clear power imbalance, since the elders control the flow of information. The manual carefully outlines how to treat those who are disfellowshipped and disassociated, including potential punishment and loss of privileges for those suspect of, yes, merely associating with them. If you tell a child you poison the cookies in the cookie jar, so they avoid cookies altogether, you can say, sure, we keep cookies in the house, and that would be a true statement. But if a person is threatened for even speaking to someone who is disfellowshipped or disassociated, then shunning the other person is the logical, inevitable result. It's obvious then that this shunning behavior, refusing to make eye contact, acting like the other person doesn't exist, no text messages, phone calls, nothing, doesn't exist in a vacuum, and doesn't require an official policy carved in stone to prove that it's still true. Consider the following articles printed in their 2013 and 2011 editions of the Watchtower, respectively. The January 15, 2013 Watchtower says, do not look for excuses to associate with a disfellowshipped family member, for example, through email. But the July 15, 2011 Watchtower carries even greater implications. The Jehovah's Witnesses refer to anyone who resigns from the organization as mentally diseased, phrasing that even resulted in a libel suit brought against them by former members who understandably oppose this label. But if you review the article carefully, it says to avoid false teachers who try to take or steal disciples from inside the congregation. It sounds like they're talking about people who are trying to actively infiltrate the congregation, or who are currently in the congregation trying to lead people away to follow their ideological path. Kind of like the bad kids in school who try to get you to go behind the dumpster to smoke a cigarette. While these people may exist, the culture of the Jehovah's Witnesses has conditioned members to read between the lines, and this article was a dog whistle to demonize and avoid anyone who leaves the Watchtower organization, no matter how peaceful their departure. It doesn't take a genius to surmise that the organization reinforces shunning through intimidation and shaming. But what about minors and adults who don't get baptized? Are they subjected to the same treatment? It's a very common counterargument. Well, I just didn't get baptized. It is true that some people never got baptized and managed to bypass all of this. They got lucky. Their parents were either never Jehovah's Witnesses, or maybe they were just flaky witnesses themselves, so they didn't really follow the rules. The child has something the parent needs, typically money, so the parent is now in the vulnerable position and is not going to risk losing their resources. Or the whole family just woke up and left together, in which case they did not lose their support system. These individuals were spared because they had the right people in their corner. However, there are countless cases where people never got baptized and they're still shunned. It's another unspoken law of the jungle. If that person willfully chooses to not get baptized, and is still just sort of hanging around, there will be at least a portion of the congregation and family members who will avoid them. All right, insiders know this as soft shunning. You know better. You were raised in the truth, right? So why aren't you baptized by now? You must be harboring subversive thoughts or tendencies. Of course, you could reduce all of this to a matter of emotional resilience. All right, you're shunned. Get over it. My parents beat me. You don't hear me complaining about it. But this is a dismissive, overly simplistic response to a complex issue. And people who would say, well, just don't get baptized and you'll never be shunned, are failing to acknowledge the power of undue influence, which is why the tragedy of Jonestown was rightfully concluded to be a mass murder and not a mass suicide. The victims of Jonestown didn't want to die. They were trapped. It's one thing for an adult to exercise his religious freedom. It's perfectly okay if he wants to make a decision, convert to the Jehovah's Witnesses as an adult, and maybe he finds out it's not right for him. He decides to leave, and he can do so with his material resources and outside relationships still intact. All right, minors are not allowed to vote, drink, drive, or get married. It's another thin, dangerous argument to exploit minors, then claim they were moral free agents when they signed on the dotted line. Jehovah's Witness history. Jehovah's Witnesses have a long history of fighting for their right to practice their faith. From acquiring permits for their door-to-door preaching to misusing clergy penitent privilege to protect their assets in child sexual abuse cases, the organization has always gone to great lengths to justify their behavior in the name of religious freedom. But what happens when your religion is inherently intolerant? Proponents of the Norway ruling say, good, it's their right to kick out and shun whoever they want to, whoever they deem unacceptable. That's their religious freedom. Government should stay out of it. There's a fundamental difference between protecting religious freedom and protecting people who are abusing their power. Analyzing the role of coercion in Jehovah's Witness culture isn't government overreach. Fine, shun an adult. It's shitty, but at least an adult has the developmental capacity to understand what's happening to them. Minors are dependents who cannot advocate for themselves on any legal grounds. But perhaps the biggest twist of irony comes from the perpetrator itself. In the July 2009 Awake, the organization addressed a common dilemma faced by outsiders who choose to study with Jehovah's Witnesses. When facing opposition from family members, the student shouldn't be put in an unfair position. Specifically, the article states, no one should be forced to worship in a way that he finds unacceptable, or be made to choose between his beliefs and his family. Here, the organization gives the benefit of the doubt to the worldly person, a term they use to categorize non-Jehovah's Witnesses. That is, if they choose to opt out of their study, they can be assured that their family bonds are not broken. They can respectfully bow out and move on with their life. This is both generous and thoroughly hypocritical, since the organization does not extend this freedom to their own members. On the contrary, if a Jehovah's Witness minor resists their parents' religion, or an adult expresses that they want to leave, they are held liable for what results in an immediate shift in the family dynamic. This double standard means that their family relationships are strained or severed altogether. Final thoughts. The Norway Appeal is almost like reviewing a domestic violence case and going, I don't see any bruises. They have joint banking accounts, they share a mortgage, they even have kids together. What's the problem? And of course, this misses the point. Like any skilled abuser, Watchtower knows how to deflect responsibility and present themselves in a way that removes probable cause. The court basically saw one thing in print and said, nothing to see here. No, we can't exactly establish that there's a pattern of psychological violence. Now, you're just a little upset because these judicial committees are somewhat unpleasant. They go on to claim that any negative social control is too vague a concept to legislate, and that any consideration of possible infringement of children's rights should be balanced against children's and parents' freedom of religion or belief. An absurd contradictory statement considering Jehovah's Witness minors are forced to attend meetings against their will. Therefore, the Court of Appeal has concluded that the practice of social distancing towards underage baptized members does not violate children's rights, as it has not been proven that this practice exposes children to psychological violence and/or negative social control aimed at children. Yeah, the person that wrote this has never been a Jehovah's Witness. They lack lived experience. They don't know the organization, beyond the carefully curated campaign amassed by Watchtower's lawyers. This ruling woefully failed to see the nuance of Jehovah's Witness culture, choosing instead to protect the nebulous, sacred arena of religious freedom over common sense and generations of anecdotal evidence. If you don't want to talk to me, fine. All right, I don't need the government to force you to talk to me. And if that's how you're going to be, I don't want to talk to you anyway. But if the government had protected me when I got baptized 24 years ago, I could at least respect my parents for shunning me right now in response to their own moral compass, not because they're indoctrinated by a corporation in upstate New York. What are your thoughts on the Norway Appeal? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'll see you soon.